Well, I think everybody knows what the shipping industry means to the Greek identity. We are a nation whose economic and cultural identity has been shaped by the sea. From minion ships to the LNG carriers, Greece, the sea has been the gateway of Greece to shared prosperity to the rest of the world. And traditionally, we've always been siding with the great maritime powers as well. So we are being shaped, and we are shaping the global industry. Now, we continue playing a leading role, and this is something that's obviously strategic for us, and the Greek government will continue supporting Greece's position in the shipping industry. 20% of global carrying capacity is owned by Greeks, and in key markets, even more than that, 25% of bulk carriers, 30% of oil tankers, and 25% of LNG carriers. Now, we live in turbulent times, as you mentioned that. The tariffs, the great power rivalry in the economic sector is reshaping the industry. It's, of course, presenting opportunities as well, but mostly for the time being, we're seeing the risks being implemented. And as a result, there's been a lot of turmoil, changing of the sea lanes, changing of the value chains, and the so-called decoupling that's being implemented right before our eyes. As a result, the Greek government is vigilant, is following those trends. It's, of course, part of the greater European family. So in all those issues, from the trade tariffs, our Prime Minister is firmly committed to the European approach, to ensuring that we have a united voice, and as such, we amplify our interests through the European lens. But at the same time, we see that things that we used to take for granted, like the great transatlantic connection in the trade field, is becoming more and more difficult to have a long-term faith in it. But at the same time, and I'll close with that, the trade relationship between North America and Western Europe still is the biggest and the strongest in the world. So the threats are there, but we also have, the counteracting forces still continuing.
Great, thank you very much. So George, you've been in this business all your life, and I want to ask you, have you seen this all before, or is this something, very, very new? And what should the response be, in your opinion, to tariffs on the one hand, dealing with the other sorts of threats that I mentioned at the beginning?
Thank you, Joan. First of all, I'd like to thank the audience for being here listening to us around a very difficult day with sleeping with the heat, so I'm really, really thankful that you're spending your time to listen to what we have to say. As you probably mentioned earlier, I've been in the shipping industry my entire life. I don't think the shipping industry has ever been anything else but controversial in any event. What worries me now, and in fact the only way I can respond right now, is that I'll quote somebody who's a very good friend, a philosopher actually for that matter, who mentioned to me. She said, "George, stay confused." I repeat, stay confused. The issue is that, again, let's say with the issue with the Panama Canal, with Trump's apprehension or difficulties or worry or whatever, we've got one basic problem, which is the fundamental problem, which I think is the basic issue which we have to worry about. When we're in issues where we have problems, the first basic prerequisite, in my view, is not to react, but to respond. I repeat, not to react, but to respond. Now, the tariffs, nothing new. We've had the tariffs hundreds of years ago with the opium trade, with the British Empire and the Chinese. We had the similar scenarios. But the point is here, what we have here is we have a controversial situation with many things happening concurrently. I mean, okay, you have the president coming out saying, I'm worried about the Chinese because they're controlling Cristobal on one side of the canal and Panama and Balboa on the other. And that, of course, has been resolved to a certain extent by having BlackRock, who I understand is taken over the commercial side of that. So, but effectively, even that's not really an argument, because the Chinese, in some respects, they're so powerful, they're so, how can I say, efficient. They're in every single industry. The Panama Canal is no different. The Panama Canal, as you all know, was built between 1904 and 1914. It took 10 years to build. Incidentally, it wasn't built by the Americans. It was started by the French. And they had to walk out because they became financially insolvent. And when the canal was built, it still was an issue which was concerned the Panama Canal, a different nation. Now, the idea, with all due respect, of coming out saying, well, we're taking over Panama, I mean, I can see to a certain extent the concern which we're having, but what I'm not going to see I'm not going to be critical about what his decision-making process. What I'm critical of is the process of how you decide. And how you decide, you have to address the people concerned, the Panama Canal, the nation, a different country. And we had a similar scenario with his observations about what he's going to do with Canada, what he's going to do with Greenland. I mean, these things can be colorful, but on the other hand, they do worry people, the world at large, simple people like me, because people of that kind of power, that kind of integrity, that kind of situation, when you come out with those kind of statements, it actually causes a disruptive worry, which is no reason, because I think at the end of the day, the tariff scenario will adjust itself. We always started with the fancy figures, and then started reducing the figures to something less. And it's been a bit of a cat and mouse scenario, if one can use that term. It is a cat and mouse scenario. But eventually it will adjust itself. But in the meantime, I think it's totally unfair to have so many people put under stress, undue stress, unnecessary stress. I mean, there've also been talks, from what I gather, of even having some kind of hostility. It could be a war or whatever. Now, why bring into the equation factors or situations which should not occur? What about being a bit more coordinated about it? And as I mentioned earlier, we have to address the issue of tariffs. There are good sides and bad sides to it, but let's look at the good side and give the world at large the opportunity of having that adjustment. It was only in your magazine, The Economist, which you mentioned there, just quote here, Trumponomics will erode the foundations of American prosperity. That's quoted by The Economist. I just saw it in your magazine today. So why have this concern? Why, when we can be more peaceful about it, to actually resolve the issue in the long term? Thank you.
Thank you very much. So, Antonio, you're bringing your perspective on this issue, Panama, so
Okay.
Let's hear it.
Before I start speaking about Panama, I want to mention that 2 times in history before, a president of the United States have imposed tariffs. Both times, the world has, and the United States ended in recession. Now, of course, the circumstances that we live today, for 40 years, we have had a free commerce world with different rules of the game. And of course, right now, President Trump wants to reshuffle, reshape. Only time will tell if it will be successful. But anyhow, in relation to Panama, the Panama-US relation has been historic since 1903, since Panama got the independence, with its up and downs. But at the end of the day, in 1977, there was a treaty signed between the US and Panama for giving up by US the Panama Canal to the control of Panama. I want to mention, in fairness, that in the last 25 years, since the year 2000, that Panama took over this endeavor of the administration of the canal, Panama has managed the canal in an excellent way. As a matter of fact, the Neo-Panamax ships that pass through the Panama Canal are a result of the new locks that were finished and started in 2016. These new locks represent 60% of the total revenue of the Panama Canal, and this was something achieved by Panamanians. Again, We have had a very good relation with the United States, as I said again, historically, with its ups and downs. We have had cooperation. Panama has had immensely cooperation in migration issues, in drug trafficking. And our history as Panama is linked to the United States. Now, it is also worth to mention that from the year 2017, 2022, for a certain reason, the United States didn't have a formal ambassador in Panama. So, and now, suddenly, in the past 5 months, you have had Secretary of State Rubio coming to Panama, the Secretary of Defense, and the Secretary of Homeland Security. So we know that we are top in the agenda of President Trump, and we are looking to cooperate. Of course, he has a very folkloric way of saying things. We know him already. But at the end of the day, it is important to mention that we want Panama to be prosperous and to have for all our lives, the American relation with Panama. To the United States.
So are you relatively sanguine about the outcome of this, I don't even know how to describe it, this incident from earlier in the year? And also, do you share more generally George's assumption and that the tariff issue will kind of calm down and sort itself out? Are you so sanguine? Yes, I'm asking you.
Sorry, can you repeat again, please?
Yes, I'm saying, so are you relatively sanguine that this incident
with the
US will kind of settle down?
Well, I think it has settled down a little bit because, first of all, there was an agreement between Panama and China. Panama, by the way, opened diplomatic relations 2017 with China. Like all the countries in the world, we are free to decide. And also, China is the second user of the canal, being the United States the #1 user. This is not a trade war that belongs to us. We're in the middle of it, basically. But still, we have to, as a country, Panama has to manage and use the diplomatical and political manage it in a way that we can play and we can keep both countries on check. Okay? Now, the U.S. had an issue that there were 2 ports located from a company called Hutchinson. One in the entry on one side of the canal, which is in Balboa, which is in the Pacific side, the other one in the Atlantic side. And these were given in an auction, public auction, in 1997. So this was way before China was the China that it is today. And it was part of Hong Kong. It's a Hong Kong-based company. And this Hutchinson is all over the world, including the United States. Still, this was an issue that was given. Also, according to the treaties signed between the U.S. and Panama, warships from the U.S. have first priority of passage through the canal. Of course, they want to not pay, but if we concede this will be violating the neutrality agreement. But there are negotiations that are being done to look for a different way. Of course, now that we have the U.S. sent military personnel in order for training alongside with Panamanian soldiers. I don't see there is a problem with that, really, because at least all my life I have seen U.S. soldiers in Panama, so I think it will be good also for the security. But anyway, that's the way it goes.
Okay. I'm actually going to open up to the floor as well. I like to do this, so if anybody does have a question on this, I mean, I have a few more questions myself, but if there's anybody in the audience who has a question, can you please stand up and stick your hand up? So it's quite hard to see from here because of the bright lights. But does anybody have a question to put to our panelists?
Question, comment?
I don't see.
I can't see. Is that somebody standing up there at the back? No. No. Okay.
John.
All right.
John, sorry. I have, if you have
Sure.
two seconds to add something else.
Yeah, sure.
In terms
Go ahead.
of the Greek presence.
Yes.
It is more important that Greece last year opened a Greek embassy in Panama. This is a very major, important step for the Greek shipping, that 30% of Greek ships go through Panama. And it's a way for Greece also to enhance their presence, not only in Panama, but in the region. So this is important to say it. And the idea is, in terms of Greek shipping, to protect Greek shipping while their ships are in Panama waters.
Can I mention something?
Yeah, come in. Just to pose another question, just to take advantage of your expertise here, just in terms of the kind of more broader, geopolitical rivalries and tariff wars, what we're already seeing is, a big reorientation of Chinese, exports to Europe. So we're seeing a lot of congestion at European ports, and probably we're reaching a point where there's some intolerance of this because the capacity isn't there, the kind of infrastructure, port-side infrastructure isn't there even to handle it, not let alone the worries about being the market being flooded with, more cheap Chinese goods. So just wanted to ask you about that, how you see, the kind of the changes or the reshaping of trading routes because of this, because of, trade wars, but also because of the geopolitical threats, the threats of war, this 12-day war that we just had in the Middle East obviously poses a big threat for energy routes and routes in general. So yeah, just to get
Sure.
Some views on that. Do you want to go ahead?
Well, I mean, we see some trends, and there has been a discussion yesterday with the Prime Minister as well and Professor Acemoglu about the big trends. I think there's a short-term threat to multilateralism. This is something that, from the Greek point of view or the Greek government's point of view, it's worrying. And we try to counteract with our own action plan. For example, we recently, as part of our being part of the Security Council for the current period, we recently convened a high-level meeting on the security of the seas and ensuring that everyone sort of discusses the latest developments in terms of securing the trade routes and furthering the United Nations UNCLOS, the law of the seas that we are part of, and we would like it for most of the other countries to be part of. So that's number one, if you like. Then we see the changes in terms of, for example, the Indian ambitions in creating the IMEC and connecting more to Europe. Greece is a natural entry point for the Middle East, for Asia, to Europe, and would like to continue playing an important role there. Yesterday, India was mentioned by a Prime Minister in terms of being a prime target of furthering our relationship, and we have our ambition of Greece being the entry point of IMEC to Europe. Then of course, we see the economic trends. I mean, the capacity that China, I'll give you just an example. In 2024, the Chinese shipbuilding corporation built more tonnage in terms of new vessels than the US built in the whole of the 5 years of the Second World War. So in total, they built more in 1 year than was built during the time that, due to the war requirements, a lot of shipbuilding ships were being created. So we see those changes happening, and this is a fact of life. But at the same time, we see the counteract. Trump, the tariffs on Chinese-operated or built ships is already affecting the Greek ship owner community. The US is a huge destination, number 2 destination in terms of Greek-owned ships, ports of call, arriving or leaving from. So those forces will shape the routes in the years to come. And of course, nobody knows exactly how the dust will settle. We are in the process where everything is up in the air. But we hope that, you know, with the looming 9th of July deadline on the EU-US negotiations, we're hoping that we will have a positive outcome because, as President von der Leyen said, this is distracting. Perhaps the flooding of Chinese goods that you mentioned is a bigger threat, but our energy now is being split. We don't only look at the Chinese side. We have to negotiate and look at the US side because, of course, the US is instigating a lot of, you know, the tariffs and the threat of tariffs and all those things. So we have to split our attention on both sides of the globe.
Thanks. You can see this clock ticking down.
Sure.
It's just going below 5 minutes left. I was hoping to finish by past, but George, you want to bring the two of you in.
I want to add something. I want to add something what Sandonia mentioned earlier. That don't forgetting the whole infrastructure of the Americans building the canal, the Panamanians themselves, of course, have created tremendous progress. I mean, right now we've got 15,000 ships transiting. And effectively, I've been to Panama. I've had the good fortune of being to Panama a few times. And in fact, I'm quite impressive, very, very impressed by the efficiency. It is actually not worked as what I call third world nation. It's very efficient. I don't believe there's any truth in the idea about saying the Americans being penalized unduly, not in the least. I think that's a bit of a, you know, hearsay. And also, in all fairness, when we talk about a general issue, I mean, I don't want to keep on going back in history, but history is very relevant. The Panama Canal was not built for commercial purposes. The Panama Canal was built for military purposes to protect the states on the west coast US and US in the east coast. So effectively, you know, we're going haywire about the commercial considerations, but we forget the reason why the Panama Canal was built in the first place. So that's why I think, as I mentioned earlier, I'd like to commend the Panamanian authorities for the spectacular job they've done. In fact, I don't know whether you ever got to meet Philip Embiricos.
Yes.
And his wife, because I mean, he told me about all his wife was from Panama, and we spent a couple of times there. And quite frankly, I'm just disappointed and disheartened by an area or a country which has been doing so efficient, so well, which is providing an impeccable service for the shipping industry, why it has to be disruptive for the wrong reasons.
Okay, thanks, George. Final word from you on how you see future...
The future, the magic ball.
Of the shipping, on this question, trading routes.
In relation to the Panama Canal transits, this has not, the volume of transits through Panama has not been affected. Either the movement on the ports of Panama ports in containers. Of course, you have to see something. As long Panama represents 8% of total commerce, shipping commerce goes through Panama. So as long as you have products from the Far East, China, Vietnam, Indonesia, Singapore, selling to US, the canal is still needed. It's indispensable for all the parties.
Just to close, because we are in Greece and there's been some good news recently about the perhaps revival of the Greek shipbuilding industry, the sector, with the commission of these new tugboats and so on. And I know we've got this now ministry for new shipbuilding projects. So presumably that's all good news for employment, for jobs in Greece.
Yeah. Well, I mean, just to add one word on the Panama side of things, let's not forget the environmental threats. There's been a drought in Panama. That's been perhaps affecting more the cost and the speed of ships moving through through the Panama Canal than the fracas between the US and Panama. So let's not forget that parameter. I'm just putting here this as a title. Now, of course, the the maritime industry is a very important industry for Greece in general. The employment, it provides 6% of GDP, but the employment is 10%, and the salaries, the average salary in the maritime industry is 3 times the average salary of the rest of the economy. So it's a very, very important industry, and as we push in our drive, which is a declared target of this government, to increase the average salary, the maritime industry plays a very important role in that. Now, the shipbuilding industry has been a traditional industry for Greeks, an industry that we have a lot of expertise, and unfortunately, for the past 2-3 decades, has been in decline. And this has been unfortunate because it's an industry that can support the rest of the cluster, the maritime cluster. So I think this has been a success story of the first 4 years, of this government. We managed to reverse a very worrying trend, and both for the military needs of vessels and for the commercial side of things, the shipbuilding industry is going to be a very strong pillar of success. And if I add, in my capacity as a sort of international economic relations, there's a lot of opportunities for the Greek shipbuilding companies to expand as well in the vicinity, be it Ukraine, be it the rest of the Mediterranean, or anywhere else.
Okay, that's great.
So,
and
Joan,
we have
last
to
thing,
finish.
one last thing. 1 second.
1 second.
We have not been, Panama has not been so bad. US imposed only 10% tariff, so it's the minimum. So we're not that bad, okay?